The Battle of Yarmouk was a major battle between the army of the Byzantine Empire and the Muslim Arab forces of the Rashidun Caliphate. The battle consisted of a series of engagements that lasted for 6 days in August 636, near the Yarmouk River, along what today are the borders of Syria, Jordan and Syria-Israel, east of the Sea of Galilee. The result of the battle was a complete Muslim victory which ended Byzantine rule in Syria. The Battle of Yarmouk is regarded as one of the most decisive battles in military history, and it marks the first great wave of Islamic conquest after the death of Muhammad, heralding the rapid advance of Islam into the then Christian Levant. In order to check the Arab advance and to recover lost territory, Emperor Heraclius had sent a massive expedition to the Levant in May 636. As the Byzantine army approached, the Arabs tactically withdrew from Syria and regrouped all their forces at the Yarmouk plains close to Arabia where, after being reinforced, they defeated the numerically superior Byzantine army. The battle is considered to be one of Khalid ibn al-Walid's greatest military victories. It cemented his reputation as one of the greatest tacticians and cavalry commanders in history. Prelude. During the last Byzantine-Sassanid wars in 610, Heraclius became the emperor of the Byzantine Empire, after overthrowing Phocis. Meanwhile the Sassanid Persians conquered Mesopotamia and in 611 they overran Syria and entered Anatolia, occupying Caesarea Mazaca. Heraclius, in 612, managed to expel the Persians from Anatolia, but was decisively defeated in 613 when he launched a major offensive in Syria against the Persians. Over the following decade the Persians were able to conquer Palestine and Egypt. Meanwhile Heraclius prepared for a counterattack and rebuilt his army. 9 years later, in 622, Heraclius finally launched his offensive. After his overwhelming victories over the Persians and their allies in the Caucasus and Armenia, Heraclius, in 627, launched a winter offensive against the Persians in Mesopotamia, winning a decisive victory at the Battle of Nineveh, thus threatening the Persian capital city of Ctesiphon. Discredited by these series of disasters, Khosrau II was overthrown and killed in a coup led by his son Kavad II, who at once sued for peace, agreeing to withdraw from all occupied territories of the Byzantine Empire. Heraclius restored the True Cross to Jerusalem with a majestic ceremony in 629. Meanwhile there had been rapid political development in Arabia, where Muhammad had been preaching Islam, and by 630, he had successfully united most of the Arabia under a single political authority. When Muhammad died in June 632, Abu Bakr was elected caliph and his political successor. Troubles emerged soon after Abu Bakr's succession, when several Arab tribes openly revolted against Abu Bakr, who declared war against the rebels. In what became known as the Ridda Wars, Abu Bakr managed to unite Arabia under the central authority of the Caliph at Medina. Once the rebels had been subdued, Abu Bakr began a war of conquest beginning with Iraq. Sending his most brilliant general, Khalid ibn al-Walid, Iraq was conquered in a series of successful campaigns against the Sassanid Persians. Abu Bakr's confidence grew, and once Khalid established his stronghold in Iraq, Abu Bakr issued a call to arms for the invasion of Syria in February 634. The Muslim invasion of Syria was a series of carefully planned and well-coordinated military operations that employed strategy instead of pure strength to deal with Byzantine defensive measures. The Muslim armies, however, soon proved to be too small to handle the Byzantine response, and their commanders called for reinforcements. Khalid was sent by Abu Bakr from Iraq to Syria with reinforcements and to lead the invasion. In July 634, the Byzantines were decisively defeated at Ajnadain. Damascus fell in September 634, followed by the Battle of Fal, where the last significant garrison of Palestine was defeated and routed. Caliph Abu Bakr died in 634. His successor, Umar, was determined to continue the Caliphate empire's expansion deeper into Syria. Though previous campaigns led by Khalid were successful, he was replaced by Abu Ubaidah. Having secured southern Palestine, Muslim forces now advanced up the trade route, where Tiberias and Baalbek fell without much struggle, and conquered Emesa early in 636. From there on, the Muslims continued their conquest across the Levant. Byzantine counterattack. Having seized Emesa, the Muslims were just a march away from Aleppo, a Byzantine stronghold, and Antioch, where Heraclius resided. Seriously alarmed by the series of setbacks, Heraclius prepared for a counterattack to reacquire the lost regions. In 635, Yazdijit III, the Emperor of Persia, sought an alliance with the Byzantine Emperor. Heraclius married off his daughter Manyan to Yazdijit III, to cement the alliance. While Heraclius prepared for a major offensive in the Levant, Yazdijit was to mount a simultaneous counterattack in Iraq, in what was meant to be a well-coordinated effort. When Heraclius launched his offensive in May 636, Yazdijit could not coordinate with the maneuver, probably owing to the exhausted condition of his government, and what would have been a decisive plan missed the mark. Umar won a decisive victory against Heraclius at Yarmouk, and used great strategy to engage and entrap Yazdijit. 3 months later, Yazdijit lost his imperial army at the Battle of Qadisiyah in November 636, ending Sassanid control west of Persia. Byzantine preparations began in late 635, and by May 636 Heraclius had a large force concentrated at Antioch in northern Syria. The assembled army consisted of contingents of Byzantines, Slavs, Franks, Georgians, Armenians and Christian Arabs. This force was organized into 5 armies, the joint leader of which was Theodore Tridorios the Sarkalarios. Vahan, an Armenian and the former garrison commander of Emesa, was made the overall field commander, and had under his command a purely Armenian army. Buxanator, a Slavic prince, commanded the Slavs, and Jabala ibn Eliham, king of the Ghassanid Arabs, commanded an exclusively Christian Arab force. The remaining contingents, all European, were placed under Gregory and Dejan. Heraclius himself supervised the operation from Antioch. Byzantine sources mention Niktas, son of the Persian general Shahrbaraz, among the commanders, but it is not certain which army he commanded. At that time, the Rashidun army was split into 4 groups, one under Amr in Palestine, one under Shurabil in Jordan, one under Yazid in the Damascus-Caesarea region, and the last one under Abu Ubaidah along with Khalid at Emesa. As the Muslim forces were geographically divided, Heraclius sought to exploit this situation and planned to attack. He did not wish to engage in a single-pitched battle, but rather to employ central position and fight the enemy in detail by concentrating large forces against each of the Muslim corps before they could consolidate their troops, by forcing the Muslims to retreat, or by destroying Muslim forces separately. He would fulfill his strategy of recapturing lost territory. Reinforcements were sent to Caesarea under Heraclius' son Constantine III, probably to tie down Yazid's forces which were besieging the town. The Byzantine imperial army moved out from Antioch in northern Syria sometime in the middle of June 636. The Byzantine imperial army was to operate under the following plan. Jabala's lightly armed Christian Arabs would march to Emesa from Aleppo via Hama and hold the main Muslim army at Emesa. Dejan would make a flanking movement, moving between the coast and Aleppo's road, and approach Emesa from the west, striking at the Muslims' left flank while they were being held frontally by Jabala. Gregory would strike the Muslims' right flank, approaching Emesa from the northeast via Mesopotamia. Kanatir would march along the coastal route and occupy Beirut, from where he was to attack weakly defended Damascus from the west to cut off the main Muslim army at Hermeso. Vahan's corps would act as a reserve and would approach Hermeso via Hama. Muslim strategy. The Muslims discovered Heraclius preparations at Shiza through Roman prisoners. Alert to the possibility of being caught with separated forces that could be destroyed, Khalid called for a council of war. There he advised Abu Ubaidah to pull the troops back from Palestine and from northern and central Syria, and then to concentrate the entire Rashidun army in one place. Abu Ubaidah ordered the concentration of troops in the vast plain near Jabiyah, as control of the area made cavalry charges possible and facilitated the arrival of reinforcements from Umar so that a strong, united force could be fielded against the Byzantine armies. The position also benefited from close proximity to the Rashidun stronghold of Najd, in case of retreat. Instructions were also issued to return the jizya to the people who had paid it. However, once concentrated at Jabiyah, the Muslims were subject to raids from pro-Byzantine Ghassanid forces. Encamping in the region was also precarious as a strong Byzantine force was garrisoned in Caesarea and could attack the Muslim rear while they were held in front by the Byzantine army. On Khalid's advice, the Muslim forces retreated to Deraa and Deir Ayyub, covering the gap between the Yarmouk gorges and the Hara lava plains, and established a line of camps in the eastern part of the plain of Yarmouk. This was a strong defensive position, and these maneuvers pitted the Muslims and Byzantines into a decisive battle, one which the latter had tried to avoid. During these maneuvers, there were no engagements save for a minor skirmish between Khalid's elite light cavalry and the Byzantine advance guard. Battlefield. The battlefield lies in the western plain of Syrian Hauran, just southeast of the Golan Heights, an upland region currently on the frontier between Israel, Jordan and Syria, east of the Sea of Galilee. The battle was fought on the plain north of Yarmouk River, which was enclosed on its western edges by a deep ravine known as Wadi Urukad. This ravine joins the Yarmouk River, a tributary of the Jordan River, on its south. The stream had very steep banks, ranging from 30 meters to 200 meters in height. On the north is the Jabiyah Road and to the east are the Azra Hills, although these hills were outside the actual field of battle. Strategically, there was only one prominence in the battlefield, a 100 meters elevation known as Tel al-Jamar, and for the Muslim troops concentrated there, the hill gave a good view of the plain of Yarmouk. The ravine on the west of the battlefield was accessible at a few places in 636 AD, and had one main crossing, a Roman bridge near Ain Darka. Logistically, the Yarmouk plain had enough water supplies and pastures to sustain both armies. The plain was excellent for cavalry maneuvers. Troop deployment. Most early accounts place the size of the Muslim forces between 24,000 and 40,000 and the number of Byzantine forces between 100,000 and 400,000. Modern estimates for the sizes of the respective armies vary. The vast majority of estimates for the Byzantine army are between 80,000 and 150,000, while other estimates are as low as 15,000 to 20,000. Estimates for the Rashidun army are between 25,000 and 40,000. Original accounts are mostly from Arab sources, generally agreeing that the Byzantine army and their allies outnumbered the Muslim Arabs by a sizable margin. The only early Byzantine source is Theophanes, who wrote a century later. Accounts of the battle vary, some stating it lasted a day, others more than a day. Rashidun army. During a council of war, the command of the Muslim army was transferred to Khalid by Abu Ubaidah, commander-in-chief of the Muslim army. After taking command, Khalid reorganized the army into 36 infantry regiments and 4 cavalry regiments, with his cavalry elite, the mobile guard, held in reserve. The army was organized in the tabi'a formation, a tight, defensive infantry formation. The army was lined up on a front of 12 kilometers, facing west, with its left flank lying south on the Yarmouk River a mile before the ravines of Wadi al-Alan began. The army's right flank was on the Jabiya Road in the north across the heights of Tel al-Jumar, with substantial gaps between the divisions so that their frontage would match that of the Byzantine battle line at 13 kilometers. The center of the army was under the command of Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah and Shurabil bin Hassana. The left wing was under the command of Yazid and the right wing was under Amr ibn al-Ayaz. Center, left and right wings were given cavalry regiments, to be used as a reserve for counter-attack in case they were pushed back by the Byzantines. Behind the center stood the mobile guard under the personal command of Khalid. If and when Khalid was too occupied in leading the general army, Dara ibn al-Azwa would command the mobile guard. Over the course of the battle, Khalid would repeatedly make critical and decisive use of this mounted reserve. Khalid sent out several scouts to keep the Byzantines under observation. In late July 636, Vahan sent Jabala with his lightly armored Christian Arab forces to reconnoiter in force, but they were repulsed by the mobile guard. After this skirmish, no engagement occurred for a month. Weaponry helmets used included gilded helmets similar to the silver helmets of the Sassanid Empire. Mail was commonly used to protect the face, neck and cheeks either as an eventail from the helmet or as a mail coif. Heavy leather sandals as well as Roman-type sandal boots were also typical of the early Muslim soldiers. Armor included hardened leather scale or lamella armor and mail armor. Infantry soldiers were more heavily armored than horsemen. Large wooden or wickerwork shields were used. Long-shafted spears were used, with infantry spears being 2.5 meters long and cavalry spears being up to 5.5 meters long. Short infantry swords like the Roman gladius and Sassanid long swords were used. Long swords were usually carried by horsemen. Swords were hung in baldricks. Bows were about 2 meters long when unbraced, similar in size to the famous English longbow. The maximum useful range of the traditional Arabian bow was about 150 meters. Early Muslim archers, while being infantry archers without the mobility of horseback archer regiments, proved to be very effective in defending against light and unarmored cavalry attacks. Byzantine army. A few days after the Muslims encamped at the Yarmouk plain, the Byzantine army, preceded by the lightly armed Ghassanids of Jabala, moved forward and established strongly fortified camps just north of the Wadi Urukad. The right flank of the Byzantine army was at the south end of the plains, near the Yarmouk River and about a mile before the ravines of Wadi al-Alan began. The left flank of the Byzantines was at the north, a short distance before the hills of Jabiya began, and was relatively exposed. Vahan deployed the imperial army facing east, with a front about 13 kilometers long, as he was trying to cover the whole area between the Yarmouk Gorge in the south and the Roman road to Egypt in the north, and substantial gaps had been left between the Byzantine divisions. The right wing was commanded by Gregory and the left by Kanatia. The center was formed by the army of Dejan and the Armenian army of Vahan, both under the overall command of Dejan. The Roman regular heavy cavalry, the cataphract, was distributed equally among the four armies, each army deploying its infantry at the forefront and its cavalry as a reserve in the rear. Vahan deployed Jabala's Christian Arabs, mounted on horses and camels, as a skirmishing force, screening the main army until its arrival. Early Muslim sources mention that the army of Gregory had used chains to link together its foot soldiers, who had all taken an oath of death. The chains were in 10-man lengths and were used as a proof of unshakable courage on the part of the men, who thus displayed their willingness to die where they stood and never retreat. The chains also acted as an insurance against a breakthrough by enemy cavalry. However, modern historians suggest that the Byzantines adopted the Greco-Roman testudo military formation, in which soldiers would stand shoulder to shoulder with shields held high, and an arrangement of 10 to 20 men would be completely shielded on all sides from missile fire, each soldier providing cover for an adjoining companion. Weaponry: the Byzantine cavalry was armed with a long sword, known as the spathion. They would also have had a light wooden lance, known as a konterion, and a bow with 40 arrows in a quiver, hung from a saddle or from the belt. Heavy infantry, known as skoutatoi, had a short sword and a short spear. The lightly armed Byzantine troops and the archers carried a small shield, a bow hung from the shoulder across the back, and a quiver of arrows. Cavalry armor consisted of a hauberk with a mailcoif and a helmet with a pendant, i.e., a throw-guard lined with fabric and having a fringe and cheek piece. Infantry was similarly equipped with a hauberk, a helmet and leg armor. Light lamellar and scale armor was also used. Tensions in the Byzantine army. Khalid's strategy of withdrawing from the occupied areas and concentrating all of his troops for a decisive battle forced the Byzantines to concentrate their 5 armies in response. The Byzantines had for centuries avoided engaging in large-scale decisive battles, and the concentration of their forces created logistical strains for which the empire was ill-prepared. Damascus was the closest logistical base, but Mansur, leader of Damascus, could not fully supply the massive Byzantine army that was gathered at the Yarmouk plain. Several clashes were reported with local citizens over supply requisition, as summer was at an end and there was a decline of pasturage. Greek court sources accused Vahan of treason for his disobedience to Heraclius' command not to engage in large-scale battle with Arabs. Given the massing of the Muslim armies at Yarmouk, however, Vahan had little choice but to respond in kind. Relations between the various Byzantine commanders were also fraught with tension. There was a struggle for power between Tridorios and Vahan. Jaragis and Kanatia. Jabala, the Christian Arab leader, was largely ignored, to the detriment of the Byzantines given his knowledge of the local terrain. An atmosphere of mistrust thus existed between the Greeks, Armenians, and Arabs. Long-standing ecclesiastical feuds between the Monophysite and Chalcedonian factions, while of negligible direct impact, certainly inflamed underlying tensions. The effect of these feuds was decreased coordination and planning, one of the reasons for the catastrophic Byzantine defeat.